On a warm and sunny afternoon, 7-year-old Timmy was fishing on the edge of the local pond, hoping to catch something exciting. He had taken up fishing recently after his grandpa had gifted him a new fishing rod. After several uneventful hours, he felt a tug. He yanked the rod upwards, expecting a big catch. However, what emerged was not a fish, but a water-soaked, algae-covered purse. Curious and a little disappointed, Timmy opened the purse. When he saw what was inside, his small face turned pale. What could possibly have startled him so much? He started screaming and he threw the bag on the ground, making a run for it. "Mom! Dad!" he yelled at the top of his lungs. Luckily, he hadn't gone far from home, and minutes later he arrived at the house, panting and out of breath. He quickly went inside and found his parents in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Timmy, is everything all right?" his mother asked as soon as she laid eyes on him. He was all red and sweaty from the running, and he still had an expression of pure shock on his face. "Whoa, what happened, buddy? Where is your fishing gear?" his dad asked. Tim looked at both of them but did not say anything yet. Timmy just looked at his feet and sighed without uttering a word. "Tim, what is it?" his mum asked again, and she walked over to him and kneeled down in front of him, sensing that something was bothering him. "You know you can tell us everything, honey," she said as she stroked his hair. This seemed to work because Timmy finally took a deep breath and said, "I found something in the pond." "What do you mean? Did you catch something?" his dad asked, showing his excitement. Sometimes Timmy came back after a long day of fishing without making a single catch, and he knew how sad it made him. However, this catch was going to be a little different. "Yeah, I did, but it was," Timmy replied, unable to form a complete sentence before he burst into tears. "Oh honey, I'm sure it is fine. Do you want us to come to the pond with you?" his mother asked, and Timmy nodded, wiping away the tears from his face. He was obviously very upset, and his parents were getting seriously worried now. So Timmy's parents turned off the stove and joined their son on a walk to the pond. They understood that he had found something that upset him, but they had no idea what it could be. "He's probably just upset because he saw a hurt fish," his dad whispered to his mom without Timmy hearing it. Little did they know it would be something much worse. Minutes later, they arrived at the pond. The bag was still lying on the ground right where Timmy had left it. "There," he whispered as he pointed at the bag. His mum smiled and said, "Oh, but Timmy, that's a bag. I have plenty of those too, you know. Is this what scared you so much?" Of course, she still had no idea what was inside it. If Timmy wasn't so scared at that moment, he would have rolled his eyes at his mother. Of course, the bag wasn't the problem. Instead, he just shook his head and said, "It's not the bag, Mum. It's what I found inside it." His parents exchanged a glance, and Timmy's dad took a few steps forward, curious to see what had upset Timmy so much. Just as he was about to pick up the bag, Timmy yelled, "Please, Dad, be careful!" and a tear escaped his eye. A little boy, but he was old enough to understand that he had found something extremely dangerous. He regretted even going out fishing that day and wished he had never found that bag. "It's all right, buddy, don't worry," his dad replied. His dad started rummaging inside and taking out some items he found one by one. The bag was filled with various tools, including a saw, hammer, and some rope. However, this was not what had shocked Timmy so much. There had to be something else inside that bag, and a few seconds later, when Timmy's father gasped, he knew he had found it. "Oh no, Monica, come take a look at this," he said to his wife, who was still standing a few steps away from him, her arm around Timmy's shoulder. When she saw what her husband was holding, she gasped and put a hand in front of her mouth. "Oh," she exclaimed. Is it real?" she asked. "I think so. I think we should take this to the police," he replied, and Monica nodded. "Yeah. I think we should take this to the police," he replied, and Monica nodded. "That's a good idea." "Timmy, where did you find this bag?" she asked her son. Timmy explained that he had just fished it up from the pond, and he had immediately run home to call his parents. "That was a great decision, bud," his dad replied. "We'll take it from here." The three of them made their way home, Timmy's dad carrying the bag with him. Once they arrived, he said, "You two should eat dinner already. I'll drop this off at the police station." Monica nodded and kissed him goodbye, and he gave Timmy a big hug. You did a great job today, you know. Now don't be scared anymore. Go eat with Mum." Little Timmy finally managed to smile for a moment, but he was still shaken by the discovery. Either way, he was happy to know that his dad was going to take care of it. "Thanks, Daddy." "Be careful," he said, and he ran into the kitchen. His dad grabbed the bag and got in the car, making his way to the police station. "They'll never believe this," he thought to himself. Once he arrived at the station, he parked his car and went inside carrying the bag with him. "Good evening, sir. I'm Officer Daniels. How can I help you?" the officer behind the desk asked him. "Hi, my name is Richard. I came to give you this," as he placed the bag on the desk. "My son found it in a pond." After turning in the mysterious bag at the police station, Richard started receiving anonymous, menacing messages. The first one appeared as a text on his phone reading, "You'll regret bringing that bag to the police." Initially, Richard dismissed it as a prank, but the pit in his stomach suggested otherwise. He tried to convince himself it was nothing to worry about, yet the message lingered in his mind, casting a shadow over his usual calm demeanor. Growing concern, the messages didn't stop. Each new one was more unsettling than the last, all hinting at unknown consequences for his actions. Richard found himself constantly checking over his shoulder, a sense of unease growing within him. At home, he maintained a facade of normalcy, but the fear that something might happen to his family started to gnaw at him. Sleep became elusive as he lay awake pondering the possible dangers that the messages portended. As the threats became more frequent and explicit, a disturbing pattern emerged. The anonymous sender seemed to know Richard's routines, mentioning specific details about his daily life. This realization sent a chill down Richard's spine, the feeling of being watched unsettling him deeply. The messages were no longer just digital words. They felt like an invasive presence in his life, an unseen adversary lurking in the shadows of his once peaceful existence. Richard wrestled with an internal debate. Should he inform the police about these threats, or should he handle them on his own? Part of him worried that involving the police might escalate the situation or put his family in greater danger. Yet the burden of facing this threat alone was becoming too much to bear. He weighed his options, each choice fraught with uncertainty and fear of the unknown consequences. Ultimately, Richard decided against going to the police. He worried that drawing more attention to the situation might provoke the anonymous sender further. Instead, he chose to monitor the situation closely, hoping that the threats would eventually stop. This decision, however, did little to ease his growing anxiety.
Richard received a new message from the anonymous sender, this time with a specific demand: return the bag. The message was clear and threatening, leaving no room for doubt about the seriousness of the sender's intentions. Richard felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The once simple act of turning in a found item had spiraled into a dangerous game of cat and mouse, with his family's safety hanging in the balance. Richard found himself in a moral quandary. On one hand, complying with the demand could ensure his family's safety. On the other, it meant hindering an ongoing police investigation and potentially aiding criminal activities. He was torn between the instinct to protect his loved ones and his sense of justice. Each option came with its own set of risks and consequences, leaving Richard feeling helpless and trapped in an impossible situation. The threats grew more menacing, each message more aggressive than the last. The unknown sender seemed to be watching Richard's every move, predicting his hesitations and countering his decisions. The constant pressure began to take a toll on Richard, his mind consumed by fear and paranoia. He struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy at home, but the tension was palpable, a silent storm brewing just beneath the surface of their daily lives. In his quest for answers, Richard's investigation led him to a surprising discovery, a recent robbery in the area that seemed to be linked to the bag he found. A news report about a theft involving items that matched the description of those in the bag. This revelation shed new light on the situation, suggesting that what Richard had found was not just lost property, but evidence of a crime, deepening the complexity of the predicament they were in. With each new discovery, Richard felt the noose of danger tighten around him. The realization that he had stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence in a criminal case made him even more of a target. He knew that the people behind the threats were desperate to retrieve the bag and would stop at nothing. Richard's sense of security eroded further, the threat looming larger and more ominous as he grappled with the reality of the danger facing him and his family. The link between the robbery and the threats became increasingly apparent to Richard. The more he delved into the details of the case, the clearer it became that the bag he had turned in was not just any lost item, but a crucial piece of evidence linked to the robbery. This realization made the threats against him more understandable, but no less terrifying. Richard knew he was dealing with criminals who were desperate to cover their tracks at any cost. As Richard pieced together the information from his investigation with the details of the robbery, the puzzle started to come together. He identified similarities in the descriptions of the suspects and the nature of the threats he received. This alignment of facts was both a breakthrough in understanding the situation and a cause for increased concern. He was close to connecting all the dots, but the closer he got, the more dangerous his situation became. The constant threat hanging over him started to take a toll on Richard's mental state. He began to feel a creeping sense of paranoia, suspecting that he was being watched at all times. Every unfamiliar face seemed like a potential threat, and every unexpected sound made him jump. The line between caution and paranoia blurred as Richard found himself looking over his shoulder more often, second-guessing the intentions of those around him. Amidst the escalating tension, Richard began to regret his decision to involve the police. He feared that his actions had put his family in the crosshairs of dangerous criminals.
Himself in a state of constant vigilance, looking out for any unusual signs around him, all while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for his family. Richard, unable to bear the burden alone, decided to confide in Monica. In the quiet of their bedroom, he revealed the series of threatening messages he had been receiving. Monica listened in disbelief, her expression turning from surprise to concern. She understood the gravity of the situation, but agreed with Richard on one critical point. They needed to keep Timmy out of it. The thought of their son being exposed to such danger was unbearable. Together, Richard and Monica formed a united front. They were determined to shield Timmy from the reality of the threats, wanting to preserve his innocence and sense of security. They discussed strategies to ensure Timmy remained unaware of the undercurrent of fear that had begun to permeate their household. It was a challenging balancing act to appear normal and untroubled in Timmy's presence, while grappling with a growing sense of dread. Despite their agreement, the burden of secrecy weighed heavily on both Monica and Richard. They found themselves exchanging worried glances, their conversations often trailing off into silence. The house, once filled with laughter and chatter, now echoed with unspoken fears. They struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the strain of the situation began to take its toll, leaving them feeling isolated in their shared worry. The couple frequently found themselves in hushed discussions after Timmy had gone to bed. They debated whether their decision to remain silent was wise. Monica expressed fear for their family's safety, wondering if they should involve the police. Richard, however, remained adamant about handling the situation themselves, fearing police involvement could escalate things. The uncertainty of whether they were doing the right thing lingered in their minds, adding to their growing anxiety. Tension within the household grew as Richard and Monica grappled with their unspoken anxieties. Each day brought a new layer of worry, casting a shadow over their interactions. Timmy, sensitive to the change in atmosphere, began to ask questions, sensing something was amiss. They reassured him with forced smiles, but their assurances felt hollow. The once peaceful and happy home was now tinged with a sense of foreboding, the unknown threat casting a long shadow over their lives. Unable to shake off the sense of impending danger, Richard decided it was time to act. Frustrated with the lack of progress and the continuous threats, he embarked on his investigation. He started by revisiting the pond where Timmy had found the bag, hoping to uncover any overlooked clues. Richard's determination was clear. He was not going to wait for the threat to become a reality. It was a decision driven by the need to protect his family. At the pond, Richard meticulously combed the area. He looked for anything out of the ordinary: footprints, discarded items, anything that might provide a lead. He also began asking around the neighborhood, subtly probing for any information about unusual activities near the pond. Each piece of information, no matter how small, was a potential piece of the larger puzzle. With every clue, Richard felt a step closer to understanding the situation he found himself in. Richard's investigation became a private crusade, conducted away from the prying eyes of his family and the unknown threat. He spent hours online researching past incidents in the area and made discreet inquiries with local businesses. Every evening, he pored over the details he had gathered, trying to connect the dots. This secret endeavor became an obsession, consuming his thoughts and time as he strived to find answers while keeping his family in the dark. Gradually, Richard began to uncover small leads. A few locals mentioned seeing unfamiliar vehicles near the pond in the days before Timmy found the bag. An old news article hinted at a series of unsolved petty crimes in the area. Each lead seemed to point towards a larger, more sinister plot. Richard felt like he was on the edge of a breakthrough, but needed just one conclusive piece of evidence to tie everything together. As Richard delved deeper into his investigation, he became aware of the risks involved. He noticed unfamiliar cars in his neighborhood and felt like he was being watched. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that he might be putting himself in danger. Yet he couldn't stop. The safety of his family was at stake. Each step forward in the investigation was a step into increasingly dangerous territory, but Richard was determined to see it through. The thought of his loved ones being harmed because of his choice was unbearable. He felt trapped in a situation with no easy way out, each option leading to potential danger. The burden of this responsibility weighed heavily on him, casting a shadow over his every thought. The sensation of being followed became more frequent and pronounced. Richard noticed cars that seemed to linger a little too long near his house, or unfamiliar figures appearing repeatedly in his vicinity. These occurrences might have been dismissed as coincidences in any other situation, but now they felt like sinister omens. Each incident added to Richard's growing anxiety, heightening his sense of vulnerability as he navigated his daily life under the watchful eyes of unseen watchers. The barrage of anonymous calls and texts showed no sign of abating. Each new message sent to Richard about the bag was more aggressive and demanding than the last. His phone, once a device for connection and convenience, had become a relentless source of stress. Every ring or notification sound made his heart skip a beat, filling him with a sense of impending dread. The constant communication was not just a reminder of the threat, but an invasion into his personal space and peace. Richard's life had been turned upside down by the ongoing crisis. His work suffered as he found it hard to concentrate, and his relationships with friends and colleagues became strained. He became withdrawn, his thoughts consumed by the situation at hand. Social gatherings were skipped, and hobbies that once brought him joy were neglected. With each passing day, Richard's resolve began to waver. He found himself questioning his initial decision to hand the bag over to the police. Doubts crept into his mind, tormenting him with what-ifs and scenarios of what might have been had he chosen a different course of action. In an attempt to regain some control over the situation, Richard began looking for ways to protect his family from the looming threat. He considered installing a security system at home and started taking different routes to work. He also explored legal advice on how to deal with the harassment. Despite these efforts, the feeling of helplessness lingered. Richard desperately sought a glimmer of hope or solace amidst the turmoil that had engulfed his life. The weight of the situation became almost unbearable for Richard. The constant fear for his family's safety, coupled with the unending pressure from the anonymous threats, drained him both mentally and physically. Reaching his breaking point, Richard knew he could no longer shoulder the burden alone. With a heavy heart, he decided to break his silence and involve the police. He went to the station, his hands trembling as he handed over his phone, showing the officers the stream of threatening messages. The police listened intently, their expressions a mix of concern and determination. The police acted swiftly, employing advanced technology to trace the source of the threatening calls and messages. They were able to pinpoint the location of the phone used to send the threats, a significant lead in the investigation. Richard watched the officers work, a sense of admiration mixed with his fear. The progress was reassuring, yet it also made the threat more real, more tangible. The pursuit of the anonymous sender had turned from a shadowy chase into a focused hunt. As the police delved deeper, more information began to surface. They discovered connections between the phone number and known criminal activities in the area. Each piece of evidence brought them closer to identifying the culprit. Richard, following the developments, felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The thought that the end of this ordeal might be in sight was comforting, but the potential confrontation with the person behind the threats was a source of new anxiety. Richard found himself becoming an active participant in the investigation. His knowledge of the events leading up to the discovery of the bag and his insights into the subsequent threats proved invaluable. Working alongside the police, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a drive to see this through, not just for his family's sake, but for justice. This collaboration also brought a sense of camaraderie and support that Richard had not felt since the ordeal began. With each passing day, as the investigation progressed, a glimmer of hope began to emerge. The police reassured Richard that they were close to making an arrest. This news was a balm to his frayed nerves, offering a promise of resolution and a return to normalcy. To his frayed nerves, the possibility of a resolution, of an end to the fear and tension that had gripped his family, seemed within reach for the first time in weeks. Richard allowed himself to believe that they might soon reclaim their peace and safety. The investigation took a significant turn when the police confirmed that the bag Richard had found contained a gun used in the recent robbery. This revelation added a grave dimension to the situation, as it tied the threats directly to a serious criminal act. Richard, upon hearing this, felt a mix of vindication and dread. The object he had innocently turned in was now central to a dangerous crime, further entangling him in this perilous situation. With the discovery of the gun, the police were able to link the threatening messages directly to the individual responsible for the robbery. This suspect, now identified, was desperately trying to retrieve the gun to erase any evidence of their involvement. For Richard, understanding the connection between the threats and the robbery was both enlightening and frightening. The police, now with a clear suspect in mind, began to strategize their next move to apprehend the criminal. They worked meticulously, planning a tactical approach to capture the suspect, without further endangering Richard's family or the public. Richard was kept informed of their plans, a gesture that brought him some comfort. He admired the police's professionalism and precision, hopeful that this ordeal would soon be over with the criminal's capture. In a breakthrough moment, a crucial piece of evidence was uncovered that solidified the case against the suspect. This evidence, which the police kept confidential, was the missing link needed to tie the suspect definitively to the robbery and the threats. Richard was relieved to hear that the police now had everything they needed to proceed. The finality of this discovery meant that the end of his family's nightmare was imminent. With all pieces of the puzzle in place, the police were ready to make their move. They closed in on the suspect, preparing for an arrest that would finally bring closure to the case. Richard waited anxiously for news, hoping for a swift and safe resolution. After weeks of fear and uncertainty, justice was about to be served. The police operation was executed with precision, leading to the successful apprehension of the robber. Richard received the news with a profound sense of relief. The arrest marked the end of a period of intense fear and uncertainty for him and his family. He was informed that the suspect was taken into custody without incident, a detail that eased some of his worries. In the aftermath of the arrest, the police revealed the full details of the crime and the subsequent threats to Richard. The robber had been involved in a series of crimes in the area, and the gun found in the bag was a key piece of evidence linking them to these crimes. The threats against Richard were desperate attempts to retrieve and destroy this evidence. Learning the extent of the criminal's activities and motivations was both shocking and enlightening for Richard. The ordeal had started with a simple act of his son finding a bag, and it had spiraled into something far beyond what he could have imagined. The realization of how quickly ordinary life can be disrupted left a lasting impression on him. Returning home after the arrest, Richard reunited with his family. He shared the news of the resolution, explaining the situation in a way that Timmy could understand without causing him alarm. This experience had brought them closer together, reinforcing their bond and appreciation for one another. The ordeal had ended, but it left an indelible mark on their lives, a reminder of the importance of family and safety. The robber, now in custody, faced charges for their crimes. Richard followed the case with vested interest, attending hearings and staying updated on the proceedings. Seeing justice served brought a sense of closure to him and his family. The legal process reaffirmed his belief in the system and the importance of standing up against wrongdoing. After the case was resolved, Richard and Monica decided it was time to tell Timmy about what had happened. They carefully explained the events in a way that was suitable for his age, ensuring he understood without causing unnecessary fear. Timmy listened with wide-eyed amazement, absorbing the story of the bag he found and its unexpected significance. The experience became a valuable lesson in safety and awareness both for Timmy and his parents. News of the incident and Richard's role in resolving it spread through their community, leading to an outpouring of support. Neighbors offered kind words and assistance, and local businesses showed their appreciation for Richard's bravery. This communal support was heartwarming for the family and reinforced their sense of belonging and security within their community. In the quiet moments that followed the resolution of the case, Richard often found himself reflecting on the entire experience. He thought about the decisions he made, the fears he faced, and the lessons learned along the way. With the ordeal behind them, the family looked forward to moving on. They embraced their daily routines with a new sense of appreciation for the normalcy and safety of their lives. Together, they stepped into the future with optimism, ready to cherish and protect the peace and happiness they shared.